Thank you, Chair. If I might, my question is for you, Mr. Costin. And actually, I would like to come back to the points you were making about the health harms around intensity and frequency of use, because that is really critically important. So the CAMH report, the Cannabis Policy Framework 2014, and the CAMH report talk about the health harms increased with intensity of use, particularly when used frequently, daily or near daily. Cannabis is associated with increased risk of problems of all types, right? The cognitive, psychomotor functioning, respiratory dependence, and health problems. So it's pretty serious that frequent users of cannabis are clearly at the greatest risk. Now, and that's why I'm really increasingly concerned, because since that CAMH report in 2014, there have been a growing body of evidence and publications in peer-reviewed journals, studies from Europe and the United States that are coming to the same conclusion, and that is that kids who are already using cannabis use even more of it after it becomes legal. So, and intuitively, that makes sense, because legalization normalizes its use. As one of our colleagues asked you earlier, I think it was Senator Rain, the government makes it legal so kids think it's okay, and they don't feel so intimidated. They don't have to call their father from the police station, and they don't have an excuse anymore to tell their friends why they don't want to use it. Right? It's legal now. No problem. So, first of all, are you aware of the evidence showing that teenagers in jurisdictions where cannabis use is legal use even more of it? And then my question would be, why proceed with legalization with advanced knowledge that it's likely to negatively impact those who are most vulnerable to the harms associated with cannabis?
So, thank you for the question. We spend quite a bit of our time looking very carefully at what we can learn from other jurisdictions, both, kind of through an academic review of whatever data is available to us, and frankly through quite a bit of on-the-ground work where we've been to most of the U.S. states, and we've got fairly well-developed relationships with the regulators there. And I'd like to think that we've reflected to the greatest extent possible. We've learned from the mistakes that they were pretty open at telling us about. I confess that I'm not aware of the research you're talking about. Regarding that there's sort of unequivocally a correlation between legalization and greater propensity of use. I'm not suggesting that's not there. I'm not calling it to mind. I am aware there was quite a bit of reporting regarding the Colorado experience in particular, so I'm a bit more familiar with the evidence that's come out of that jurisdiction. There's a letter that the governor of Colorado wrote to the Attorney General Sessions in response to some questions that the Attorney General had asked of the governor, and one of the questions was specifically around the impact that legalization had over the years with respect to youth access. And in the response, the governor indicates that it's kind of been a net neutral experience, that they haven't seen that I don't want to look at the name of the study, but whatever their Rocky Mountain Public Health Survey or whatever the data source is, sort of showed a flatlining of youth access. And I think that's in a context where the state has taken, I think, a fairly permissive approach to regulation of cannabis, and really, when we look at the proposal that we're contemplating, whether it's the packaging and labeling, certainly to the question earlier, the restrictions that are set out in the bill with respect to sponsorship, marketing, promotion, any kind of corporate endorsement, these are all features that don't exist at the state level, and so audiences are much more exposed to promotions than they would be in the Canadian context. So it's hard to necessarily maybe extrapolate precisely from the Colorado experience, but
Rude
Sorry.
and interrupt, except that,
Gotta move on.
with all respect,
This
yeah,
has
I
gone
know.
long.
I know, but with all due respect, just the Colorado example, I think, is, not a good one to use in the sense that it's still very new. It's maybe a couple of years old. And the data that they collect is, fraught with huge biases and problems. So I would prefer that we not use, if we're talking about the increase in frequency of use and more regular use by young people, there's a lot more data available than Colorado. So I'll just leave it at that for now, but it's a growing problem, I think, so.
can I
Yes.
say, ask one point? So, to the best of my knowledge, Colorado is the first jurisdiction in the world to legalize. So you're right. There is an issue with this is a relatively new phenomenon. So tracking the impact over a number of years, but they in Washington State were the first. So that where we look at trends, and I agree with your point about data collection that it needs to be looked at with a certain critical eye. But in terms of looking over the impact over years, right now it's probably I would say probably the best predictor, with all the caveats that would be appropriate.
Okay,